So I'm just coming on here to talk a little bit more about the Philosophy Tube video. Some of you've seen my video responding to basically just one claim in a really long video essay from this channel, just about debunking the comparison between sex scenes in theater or in movies and prostitution. And the whole artists kind of sell their bodies, so don't we kind of all, so what's particularly bad about prostitution? I just don't have the time and the resources to go through every single claim in that video and debunk it bit by bit. I could only do that if YouTube was my full-time job, and as of right now, I have made exactly 0 cents of this channel. And, the funding from the fundamentalist Christians that people claim I get, it just hasn't come in. It's been going on 6-7 years of activism, and I'm not getting that church money. So that said, I wanted to kind of discuss 2 points regarding that video. And the first is, it's pretty obvious from the title alone, calling it sex work, the ideological stance that Philosophy Tube is coming at the issue with. Obviously it's a biased video. There's a little bit of representation of the abolitionist stance, some quotes from Kollontai, which, on the one hand shows that prostitution abolitionism has a long, long history and is nothing new and is actually deeply entrenched in the left. Sure, but it kind of neglects to show that abolitionism is a modern movement, right? If you want it to have it more balanced, then the same way that a porn performer was interviewed, there should be an exodate woman, someone who understands themselves to be a survivor. Because that movement is growing, it's here, it's right now. At least I don't ever get the feeling that the video is really, truly interested in and exploring the critiques of the sex trade, and gives a little bit of an idea that it's, not the women themselves, but others projecting onto them the exploitation, etc. But I think what maybe viewers aren't so aware of, they realize from the title and a few minutes in, the stance of the video, but the way that it convinces you, I don't think it necessarily so much convinces you that prostitution is work, but that full decriminalization, so decriminalizing the seller, the third-party profiteer, like a brothel owner, an escort agency owner, a so-called manager, and the John, that's full decriminalization, that is the best option. Which is, I guess, representative of how the pro-decrim movement works. It's moved away slightly from suggesting that prostitution is grand, glamorous, fantastic, and is more like, yeah, it's a job like any other. You got good days, good clients, bad clients. But the best thing to do is to just have the government lay off this industry. Because it's been so historically abusive, all it's ever going to do is abuse, and it's best to just move the government out and the police out, and then the conditions will improve in this industry. And the way it convinces you is, most of the video is spent talking about police violence. And you get another case, and another case, and another case, and certainly these are not anecdotes, like there is a pattern. Right? Police abuse their power over women. This is a problem in domestic violence, in rape cases, in child abuse cases that don't even have to do with sexual violence, but which give a police officer power over a victim. The point is not to say that we shouldn't discuss those issues or that they're not systemic, but how it works for you as the viewers, you just hear those stories. You just hear, like, an interaction with the police is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a woman. And I want to say, I just came from a conference last week where a woman said, when she went, not in Germany, another country, she didn't say which, but when she met the police, not just her and other women, they were raped and tortured, right? So I'm really not trying to say that these concerns aren't real, but if you only hear about the police violence, which the video does, it makes you forget about the pimp and the John violence. And that is the shitty situation that women are in. They're caught between a rock and a hard place, especially in countries with prohibition, but I'm not saying police violence isn't still a concern in countries with legalization or the Nordic model, because of course, like, police has still power. There's still other avenues that they can accuse her of a crime, and police are Johns and pimps too, so that's a major issue. And this is really important to consider from the perspective that even under decrim, when she is harmed, she's supposed to go to authorities, someone in authority. And then you do have to deal again with the police. That is, unless, of course, you're in the full abolish the police brigade and you think no woman should ever accuse her rapist or attempted murderer or, right? But at the end of the day, you got to reform the justice system no matter what law you support. And you can, which we do advocate, you can be a pro-decrim advocate or a Nordic model advocate and say the first contact with the woman's sex trade should be a social worker and an NGO, and ideally that NGO has survivors working at it so that she doesn't have to deal with the police and the courts herself. At the end of the day, police reform is part of decrim too. People pretend like it isn't. Where is she supposed to report violence? Just to the brothel owner. Oh, because they've got such an interest in letting people know that there was violence at their brothel. Yeah, makes sense. To an NGO, what are they going to do about it? Arrest the guy? Write him a strongly worded letter? Have a sit down? There's police interaction either way. The degree may vary. We can do more law comparisons another time. But the point is, the video tells you so many of these stories that you just come away with thinking, yeah, this is the biggest problem, and it just totally overshadows all the other ones. The biggest problem is how society responds to prostitution. There's not anything particularly wrong with prostitution itself. And this is obviously what us abolitionists would contest. I mean, if I wanted to, I could make the same video and I replace every instance of police violence with John and pimp violence, and then you'd be like, oh, we need the Nordic model because Johns, clearly they're all violent criminals. And I try not to make this argument. People like to accuse abolitionists of just talking about trafficking, but I hope those of you who actually take the time to listen to me, and lots of women like me, we're really not saying that trafficking is the only problem or is the worst thing, or we are trying to make the case that prostitution itself as a system is exploitative, dehumanizing, violent, even if there wasn't a single pimp. And this is also what Philosophy Tube addresses to an extent, basically makes the claim that we fail to demonstrate what's wrong with prostitution fundamentally. We can only demonstrate that there are bad things attached to prostitution. I'll definitely make a video talking about how trafficking and prostitution are linked in a manner that you cannot disentangle them. So accepting prostitution always means accepting some degree of trafficking. And you bet I'll be talking about New Zealand and their 0 prosecutions of traffickers and just pretending it doesn't exist. But anyway, that's the second part I want to talk about. Let's say there wasn't a single pimp in the German or Kiwi sex trade or in the global sex trade. Not a single pimp, not a single person watching over her shoulder, taking money off of... it's ludicrous because someone's always profiting off of her. An advertiser, someone renting the rooms, someone selling her the supplies. I'm sorry. I'm trying to go with the thought experiment that there aren't third-party profiteers, but let's say they are, and they're all very fair in their pricing, and the clothes and the photos and the rooms and everything that the women get is not more expensive than it is for if someone opened a hair salon. Let's imagine that was the case. It's not the case, but let's say it was. So no one's making extraordinary sums. No one's doing these fees where, oh, you're too late, oh, you're not wearing your outfit. No debt bondage, no Hell's Angels, none of that. Pimps don't exist. Women are all independent. The evidence is still overwhelming that other factors, not flesh and blood people, work as very, very effective pimps. I just need people to understand this. Poverty is a pimp. We know the countries that women are from. We know the social stratas that they're from. They come from the most marginalized parts of society. Poverty, homelessness, migration, undocumented people, single moms, women juggling multiple jobs, lack of education, lack of high school education. It just makes me so upset when people who claim to be intersectional feminists don't even bother to look at the demographic data of the women they're discussing and ascribing all this agency to. People like Philosophy Tube that I don't know the details, I don't want to repeat rumors, but just vaguely from what I heard, pretty privileged people. And I'm privileged myself, okay? I just happen to live in a country where I've experienced it multiple times that men ask me if I'm for sale, and let me tell you, it's not empowering. It's actually harrowing, frightening. The other thing that ties into it, trauma. I'm sorry. When I read stories from women, this excludes women who call themselves survivors, exited women, sex workers, prostitutes, hookers, whatever. Their stories are often extremely similar, with the exception of a tiny handful of university educated women who do this part-time because to them it feels like an adventure, and let's be real, even they often have stories of assault. Not only are women marginalized class-wise, migration-wise, it is not fiction that women enter the sex trade due to trauma. I don't know a single survivor who isn't also a survivor of rape, often as a child, repeatedly incest. I mean, I know it happens, but I sometimes struggle to believe that most people who are pro-prostitution have honestly engaged with issues like incest, child rape, the sexual violence against teenage girls and young women. And the problem that many of these victims cannot see themselves as victims, cannot access justice. I thought we were slowly, at least as intersectional feminists, understand how, for example, youth who run away from home end up with unsafe people, or how traumatized people may reenact trauma and get into abusive relationships again and again. But somehow the system of prostitution is exempt from that. Somehow all the things we know about how trauma works, how it makes you feel worthless, how it makes you feel you deserve something, how it makes you unable to recognize violence because your bar for fair and kind treatment is in hell, how we forget all these things when it comes to the sex trade. And rape culture is everywhere, but not where there's commoditized sex. Oh, no. It makes me so mad. And like, Johns know this shit, so why don't you all? The conference I was at a week ago was about a study that came out this year about German Johns, and they demonstrate extremely high levels of awareness of all these dynamics. They know exactly how precarious women's lives are. Which brings me to the next point, addiction. I'm sorry, drugs are a pimp. And I know there's lots of intellectuals who like to write these studies about heroin-addicted young men in street prostitution in Vietnam. That's a concrete example I skimmed through, and their agency and how they learn English from the sex tourists. And I do wish that you wouldn't be allowed to write horrible studies like this unless you had to sell your own ass in Vietnamese street prostitution for at least 1 week. Do a field experiment, huh? Right, so addiction is a pimp. I'm sorry, does addiction make people do things that are bad for them and dangerous? And yes, and then people say, yeah, but not all addicts enter the sex trade. Yeah. You know who has high rates of addiction? Traumatized women and girls and young men do. You know what drugs are used for? To numb the pain from sexual abuse. These things are all tied together. So I absolutely reject, and I know that the pro-prostitution movement has very different views on this, that Poor and or undocumented and or traumatized and or addicted people are making a free choice and get all this agency and are consenting to the sex trade. Because if it was their landlord or even someone with a bit more money or income, if someone exchanged food or drugs or housing instead of cold hard cash, you'd call it rape. But because they get money, it's sex work. That's bullshit. Bullshit, okay? So all of these aspects are fucked up, and I don't remember them featuring at all in Philosophy Tube's video. Maybe a little bit of the marginalization, right? Like an overrepresentation of people of color and trans people in the sex trade, right? Because we're intersectional. But these are all reasons to normalize the industry rather than try to gradually abolish it. Okay. I will make a video very soon. I've been planning this for a long time. I will take you through advertisement pages, legal advertisement pages for the sex trade in Germany. Obviously, it's going to involve a lot of blurring. I saw some fucked up images to do this work because these websites are worse than I thought. Like the objectification of sex trade, it starts with the advertising, right? The average John today, he goes online. He goes on one of these escorting websites or brothel, like the brothels and escort agencies, they advertise on the same page. Anyway, German website, biggest one that does this, by the way, is called Kauf mich, which means buy me. Not buy my sexy time, buy me. But I know bodies are not for sale and people are not for sale in the sex trade. That's just a coincidence. I'm sorry. Like that they have to state their body sizes and their skin color and their hair color and their breast size. And that's just, that doesn't, no, this is about their skill and their personality. It's not about bodies for sale, right? The images on these websites, they're horrific. They're horrific. I mean, these are worse than I thought. Like, because I really try and avoid looking at pornographic images. I didn't think they were going to be so pornographic, and this website has this reputation for being relatively glamorous. I mean, that's how the advertisement for the website itself looks. But these images, they're so horrible. They're so nobody who looks at these. Okay, I guess I don't know how many. Okay, a lot of porn addicts in this debate. Maybe you all can't see the dehumanization anymore because your heads are so full of these images where you just like singled out body parts, smushed body parts, bruised body parts. That's the first interaction between a John and a woman in the sex trade. A close-up shot of her breast, her vulva, her ass. And it doesn't look like glamorous photography. It doesn't look like upscale modeling. It looks like the lowest grade of homemade porn. And that tells you nothing about the women themselves and everything about the Johns. Johns do not view women in the sex trade as people. That includes all you all who keep talking to me on here and on Twitter about how you respect women and you can tell who chooses to be there. No, you can't. Nobody can. The police can't. Social workers can't. You can't. Like, I don't need a study. I don't need to look at your disgusting rape forums. I just look at prostitution advertisement and I know exactly how you see women. The dehumanization of these images alone, like anyone with any progressive, well, what's the fucking point? You all defend porn, you all love porn. And porn is so violent and dehumanizing and traumatizing to like my entire generation. Thank you very much. And you people call yourself feminists and leftists and defend it. Talk about individual agency and all the demographic stuff that I was talking about, the sex trade goes with porn too. Like if you oppose prostitution, like you must oppose porn. And like these industries overlap. I'll make a video about that too. But what am I trying to say is, like the way that women have to advertise themselves in sex trade is completely dehumanizing. And you have to be an absolute 100% porn addict not to see it. It's so blatant. Like that is fucked up. And I don't care if there's like 10% of the women on this website are what the ad says, because all the ads say, I love sex and I just like big dicks and blah, 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 blah. And I just do this as a hobby. That could have been written by the pimp. It could have been written by the woman herself. Who knows? Who the fuck knows? Nobody knows. Who in their right mind thinks we should have a giant industry that reduces women to sex objects and makes them pretend to be nymphos so men can have quick relief? I mean, this is fucked up. This is fucked up. Like, I don't even need to go into the violent sex practices. I know you all are fine with that as well, because apparently you can do whatever you want to a human being, anything you want. You can, short of killing them, but if you have a fetish for like pseudo-necrophilia or like a rape fetish, or you like to ask women in the sex trade to pretend to be children, that's fine. And I'm kink shaming if I oppose that. Right? I mean, what's the point in me listing brutal acts that are objectively dangerous to your body? And I believe your psyche. You're all going to say, yeah, but if there's consent, like consent means nothing anymore. Like, you've destroyed these words, agency, consent, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, the police is fucking violent. Let's get back to that. The police is fucking violent. Women are between a stone and a hard place. A lot of these women some of them, a significant number, hostages of organized crime. The rest, hostages of poverty, addiction, and trauma. We're calling for the full decriminalization of the sex trade, and then in brackets, the pimps and the johns too, while there's a global recession and pandemic and rising climate change, and instead of fighting for the things that these girls and women and young men and trans people actually need. You are against sweatshops, right? And you are against child labor, and a third of people enter the sex trade as minors. Like, you cannot separate child rape and prostitution. Why isn't this in the video? That's fundamental to the discussion. You can still be of the view that the police is the worst thing, blah, blah. Like, that can still be your opinion, but you cannot just ignore something like that. And prostitution is fucked up because it exploits the most vulnerable people in society, and the people doing it, who are 99% men. And I'll make a video about female sex tourism. I'll do it. The men, they know. At least the ones who do it routinely, they know how bad things are. They know they're not wanted. Prostitution's fucked up because you're letting men do things that you'd call rape, and rightfully so, if just a few parameters of the situation were changed. You call it rape. If a girlfriend at home had to keep faking and keep saying, yeah, I want to have sex even though she doesn't want to because otherwise the boyfriend will get mad or he'll make her move out or whatever, you'd say that she's being raped. But if that's the woman at the brothel and it's many men and johns, then it's fine. I got a video about all the ways that prostitution violates consent. Most of the things I talked about in this video and on my entire channel are not about sex trafficking. They're not about pimps. Prostitution is fucked up. Putting access to bodies, sexual access to people's bodies and their sexual boundaries on the market, subjected to market forces. Not me, but the market decides how I'm going to have to dye my hair, if I'm going to need a boob job, if I'm going to have anal sex, although it's painful. I could go on. We cannot call for equality between the sexes, for an end to racism, an end to classism. I don't get it. The heart of prostitution is antithetical to everything good. Like, I don't get it. How an industry this vile has such passionate defenders, short of the Johns, who are always in my comment section. Again, yeah, police and social services have historically, horrifically failed and harmed people in the sex trade. Same with domestic violence victims, rape victims, etc. Nobody is calling to decriminalize rape just because the crime is overwhelmingly mishandled by authorities, or domestic violence, or stalking. And the idea that all that it takes is the seller decriminalized, and whenever something's off, be that someone's not using a condom, someone's punching her, someone's whatever, she'll call for help. Bullshit. You guys know how hard it is for the average, like including myself, right? College educated, middle class, and when bad shit happens to me, It's not easy for me to ask for help, and I can't rely that it'll be handled well. But this same mechanism that's so flawed that you are all rightfully critiquing all the time, it is going to work for women in the sex trade whose marginalization is off the charts. And if I hear one more person comparing themselves to women in prostitution while they have a desk job or they're in retail, go do it for a week and come back and tell me if it's the same. Come on, you guys know better. Such bullshit. One, the police are not the only problem. We have to look at pimps and johns. And we have to look at the heart of prostitution. A belief in a male right to sex. Prostitution is a core pillar of rape culture. Even if there was no trafficking, and there is lots, even if there was no trafficking, it'll still be fucked up, it'll still be wrong. And no leftist worth their salt can seriously support this crap. You know who loves full decrim? Pimps and johns. They're on your team. Not saying the Nordic model is perfect, or that it's easily applicable in countries with a weak social welfare system. It's not. But decrim is straight up what pimps want and what johns want. Yeah, it's just pretty amazing how little they feature in that video by PhilosophyTube. Pretty gigantic omission. I do want to make more videos about the Nordic model as well, discussing the pros and cons and different forms of implementation. But I want to make sure I get all my facts straight, and that takes a lot of reading. And like I said, because the evangelicals who give money to atheist radical feminists who also advocate for abortion rights, because that money hasn't come in, like, I also work and I study, so that's why those videos haven't come yet. And that's why today I'm just giving you a rant, and I'm not even gonna put my face because it's just too exhausting sitting down and looking at a camera. I just want to mention one more video that I have in the pipeline, which is about the history of prostitution with a focus on Germany. I understand you can't cover every single issue attached to this, but for a channel that calls itself PhilosophyTube, one maybe would have wanted to cover the history of philosophy on the sex trade, because as it turns out, a lot of patriarchal philosophers are pro-prostitution, including a bunch of theologians and thinkers before Christianity was around. So, for all the claims that this is the oldest profession, people don't actually like to look at the history. I don't think I've seen a single PhilosophyTube video in full other than this one, so maybe in other videos there's more coverage of the history of philosophy of a given subject, but I felt that was a little bit of a omission. Not that dead old men from what's today Europe got the wisdom on everything, but since they shape our culture, it's relevant where ideas come from, like the idea that some women are born for prostitution and they just have a certain constitution, and that used to be a thing that, was a negative attachment to her, and today it's, celebrated. Well, not really celebrated, but superficially celebrated in some circles and some parts of the media and the left. So PhilosophyTube didn't cover it, but I will, so you can look forward to that.